Hello.
Hello, Bill. Good afternoon. LinkedIn, welcome to another edition of Let's Build CPQ with Bill Barlas. How you doing, man?
I'm excellent, Chris. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for you today.
Hey, I
Thankful for the
appreciate that.
opportunity. Yeah, to
Thankful
be
for
on the
you.
show, and
It's Thanksgiving already, man.
it is.
Can you
Let's,
believe that?
yeah, let's build, and then let's sit down and sit on the couch and not build for a while. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Um, and we'll definitely like lead into that break with a bang. Like, still talking about one of the most complex tools or pieces, of the stack configurators for products, uh, and it's such a complex topic that I wanted to get practical with it today. Because even understanding like what eh, some people make it very easy to just click buy on the CPQ and like, okay, 90-day plan. All right, come in, just tell us what we need to do. And people, you get in there and you're just not ready, right?
yes,
And like, so before we get into the actual, we're going to do an example like scoping exercise of what actually needs to be done. Like, um, what are the problems you run into when you don't kind of understand what a configurator, what is required to really implement a configurator successfully?
yep, absolutely. So, um, typical issues if you jump in head first without significant planning is you end up copying your existing bad process. Um, you're you're not asking the right questions, and so maybe you get a little bit of bump in your code velocity. But what we're really looking for is organizational change and a better experience for the end customer. And so you know it's we want to automate good process that's well thought out, and I think there's a lot of knowledge usually inside an organization about what should happen and how to do it. And so uh, this set of questions that we're going to talk about today, hopefully will begin to drive towards that. Uh, so that's the
Yeah.
answer.
Nah, I think that's first half kind of thought of it in that way where like not even asking for configuration or asking for a level of automation to the
Hmm.
quoting process that
Yeah.
provides protections and boundaries and helps the internal teams, quote the right things at the right time to the right people.
Yeah.
And while some salespeople are very good at that in the moment, it's it's like after years, 10, 20, 30 years of knowledge of every variable in play and do this, don't do that. If this is if this then that, like constantly throughout the
Mhm.
process, right? And when you don't have that documented, um, it doesn't work out too well when you try to tell a system how to do
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. Well,
So I'm gonna share my screen because this is very near and dear to me in my material science career, making customizable instrumentation, customizable materials. It could be the whole elemental, periodic table of elements involved. Like it's super applicable as uh, a need, right? The configuration need for these companies, and I just had all the trouble in the world, right? Bringing it in, and um, usually from an understanding of like, oh, it's just too complex, so we're not even going to ask. Like, how could a system possibly do,
yeah.
what we're doing? And so I brought up an example, XRF company, place that does, provides using pre-owned analyzers, right? But also there's rental, there's lease to own, there's all this different optionality, right? And
Mhm.
that's the part we're trying to offer optionality in a way, both for our internal teams to be flexible, like to give the customers what they want, but also to make sure it's clear for the customers that when they get the thing, it's very clearly outlined what the expectations are, costs related to upgrades, downgrades, packaging, like all this stuff, right? You
Yeah.
throw distributors and manufacturer reps in the mix. Now you got like discounting variables to keep track of and all this stuff. So, uh, and for those trying to be like a one-stop shop, which often happens, like when you're selling equipment, right? You say, like, okay, let's involve training, let's involve consumables, materials, like all the things you need to be successful, right?
Yep.
One of those things, reference materials, the primary space that I'm from. And as an example, we have different metal types, we have different concentrations, we have different ways, like precious metals here, like it doesn't always go by concentration. There's a whole carat system, right?
Hmm.
And these are the kinds of things like I'm generally asking these questions during the process. Okay, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Like, why, when? So I guess without giving it all away, I'm coming to you as a like, look at all these products, Bill. Like, I know that we
Yep.
can like the coding process is just I can't scale it. Like, takes way too
Yep.
long to create a quote. Like, how I'm sick of like having to redo quotes because like we quoted something that we can't even make. I need a CPQ.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think that you hit on some extremely important topics in what you just said, and they're going to fit really well into our first question. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk a little bit about the current state of how things are quoted. You mentioned analyzers, you mentioned rentals, you mentioned purchasing, pre-owned equipment. You had mentioned a more complex component of your business that has some calculations around chemistry of precious metals and different things like that. So the first question we should really ask, and this is sort of going back to all of the shows that we've had already. Um, at the moment, how do you produce a price and a quotation to your customer, Chris? So you have a prospect, you've had an initial conversation. What happens then? How do you get a price for, let's say you're going to do some samples for them? How does that work today?
So a couple different avenues. Um, if we have it in stock or in inventory, the price exists in a price table somewhere. We're still trying to create a source of truth there, um, but definitely spreadsheets are sometimes involved. If we don't have it in stock, there is a purchasing situation that happens, and based on some of the costs, because sometimes the specific material isn't available and there's a new material and the price is different. Now we've got to bring it into the system in order to quote it, and then we don't buy it unless the order is placed, right? So uh, there's some like in place or like yes, we want it in the system because we know we will use it later, but maybe there's some stuff we might not sell.
Yeah,
So I don't know if we should necessarily build that kind of thing in, but that's those are the kind of like dynamic situations that we have usually via email. When we're lucky, they're just sharing links, to the website pages, um, but we're
yeah,
not always that lucky.
yeah. So it sounds like what happens right now is somebody comes in and says, "I want something," right? And then there's a spreadsheet somewhere. Is that right? That has a list of products on it.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you pull from that spreadsheet for things that are currently on hand inventory. You give them prices for those right away. And then for things that are either custom or don't exist with inventory, you have to actually go and seek a quote from elsewhere first. And
Right.
then that price gets typed into a Word document or something like that. And then,
Generally into HubSpot. So the final quote comes from HubSpot. We're adding line items
gotcha.
that are usually connected to the product library, and there's some integration with Shopify to try to manage that. And we're in the
Gotcha.
process of cleaning all that up. That's why it's like, okay, what are all CPQ kind of makes sense, but also we're just trying to clean up our processes like as a
Yeah.
whole, right?
Yeah, so it sounds like right now you have disparate data. So things hanging around in different locations, some in a spreadsheet, then everything is sort of being pumped into the product library in HubSpot, either as a custom quoted line item or as a standard item that's being created at the time of quote, right? And
Yep.
how is that in terms of the CRM component and the actual creation of the quote template? How is that piece of it working today? Are you happy with your quote output documents? Are you happy with how that looks with your turnaround times on that part?
Yeah, yeah. Because generally, I think the nice thing is that so all the configuration happens during the conversation, and
Hmm.
then most of the time they don't need optionality on the quote. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, we've already decided that this is the line item that you need.
Yeah,
So the simplicity of the HubSpot quotes, makes that pretty straightforward.
got it. So, a question that I have for you about this, because it's going to sort of split the conversation into two separate kind of possibilities. Um, i- in that situation, when your customers are coming to you, these are B2B customers and they're fairly sophisticated, correct?
Uh, it's the whole range,
The whole range.
including like pawn shops and gold and silver dealers,
Got it.
uh,
Okay.
and then scrap metal and like so the whole range. And generally for those different groups, we're like certification levels and you know like yeah, like the accuracy of the components in the material is what changes from buyer to buyer, and from use case to use case.
Absolutely. And so within that, the reason I'm asking that question is because, as we talk about the vision, so we've talked a little bit about, current state of things, how we're doing things today. Um, I'm assuming that getting a quote out the door quickly is important. Do you think your customers are at a point where they know enough when they're calling in that they could actually manage this themselves? Like if there was a self-service capability, is that part of the final vision, or is the vision still to have customers calling upon an individual who sort of runs the tool set for them?
Self-service would be amazing, and
Yeah,
there's definitely some set of the customer base that will be able to use that.
yeah,
um, I think all of them would probably use it, but we would definitely be looking out for those that maybe don't need what they suggest they need, and it wouldn't remove like it would speed us up the consultation,
yeah,
process, and
absolutely.
so I could definitely see some value. Also, like there's this after sale component where they've purchased the material and there's lots of documentation related to that, and we want to make that accessible, via some kind of self-service portal.
Yeah, absolutely. So things that could be automated then, if I'm understanding correctly. So a customer comes in and the vision is really it's more than one way of doing things. There's a self-service concept that we believe a set of customers would be able to use. And then there's also a component to this tool that might be um, used for more than one purpose. One would be for things that you don't feel like should be available for self-service, right? So are there things that are so complicated that you feel like somebody internal to the organization should be looking at before writing a quote for them?
Um, yes, there will be
Yeah,
times
absolutely.
like that. I mean, in theory, if the configurator is working well and can't put out things that we can't make, then maybe not. I'm okay with them getting pricing and then like working with them to maybe walk it back or walk it towards something else, because the actual use case requires a different, um,
Yeah.
has different requirements.
Yeah. So we have that aspect where we would want internal users, and then the other one we have is people that have a more traditional communication style. Maybe they don't even want to be self-service. There will be some use cases where an internal person will need to be able to log into the system, do a configuration for somebody, and then send a quote out. Um,
Yep.
Another key question: does XRF sell through a sales rep network, through distribution, through any other sales channels other than a direct sales approach?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a sales rep network or distributors, or who are the humans that are interacting with that?
It's a bit diverse. Uh, in the US, it's more likely to be some kind of like maybe individual manufacturer rep that works with other, manufacturing vendors. But when we work with international, it's usually like a distribution or, I mean, it's actually it's a, it's a manufacturer rep in that case too, but it's like a whole company that
Yeah,
serves like the country.
absolutely. Yep. So they're repping a line card, and one of the things on there is the products from XRF. Yeah.
Yep.
And they need to have that self service as well. So today they're also calling in, asking for a quote, right?
Yeah. And then asking for catalogs that I don't have right now. And as much as we'd love for everybody to go to the e-commerce store and just check out there and be happy, that's not how it works
Yeah.
in practice.
So it sounds like then, so talking about vision, the vision and the goal is, overall. So we'll probably start with a smaller component when we get to actually building this thing. But the overall vision of this is self-service for three kind of types of users, right? So you have an internal set of users who are going to send quotes out to people requesting them. You have a sales rep network, so a team of people that need to have self service that you might want to have some tracking and analytics about, right? I'm sure they have goals, quotas, things to continue to work with XRF. So being able to
Yep.
see what they're quoting in the market is extremely useful. And then you have end users who right now they sort of know what they want, but at the same time, they might be able to self-service a quote, but we want to have some guardrails and guidelines around what they're able to quote, and we might want to have a touch point before the quote becomes an order. So we need to be thinking about that as we talk, right?
Right.
So so those are sort of our three archetypes that we're going to be considering. Um, so within that, for those three types of people, does the quote output, the thing that we're actually sending to the customer, does it look the same for everybody in the perfect world? Or are they different documents for different folks? How do we want to think about that?
Um, that's a good question. I think we would start from a place of the same,
Yeah,
and then if we develop like more robust relationships where like the tools are actually in their hands, like maybe it's just like modularized,
yeah.
outputs.
Absolutely, yeah, because potentially a good place to sort of manage those quote outputs, the different flavors and types of quote output behaviors, might be with the template themselves that are available to these different types of users, right?
Right.
So maybe for internal and for sales reps, we want to have a little bit of tracking information about who's opening quotes, who's taking a look at them, things like that, which might be really useful, right? Whereas for
Yep.
a customer, maybe we want, somebody downloads a document, downloads a mini site, something like that. And really what we're looking for there is something that says, please call us before you submit an order or something of that nature, right? So we might want to have a slightly different template, but it wouldn't be significantly different based on who the user is, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where we've always wanted visibility like that. It's just like it's really hard to see what they're doing when none of us are using the same systems. So usually it's just like, send the leads and then wait for the stuff to close,
Mm-hmm.
um, which we know is not great, but
Yeah.
it's we haven't figured out. I'm told that CPQs are something that can help with that. But
Yeah.
um, should I be concerned with like uh, thinking that I can just spend a bunch of money on this tool and then give it to the distributors or the manufacturer reps and they're like definitely going to use it? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I've run into that is fairly universal among sales reps and distributors of companies, as long as you make it fairly easy for them to do this, most of them are going to be happier to self-service. You know, it's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving right now, so we have 2 working hours left, and there's probably a sales rep somewhere that desperately needs a quote. So giving them the opportunity to self-service, as long as we make the user experience easy, this is probably not something we need to consider too deeply, right? As long as they're able to get the same quote, the same information out, and they feel confident about the correctness of it, oftentimes reps are happier to self serve than they are to call in. Um, so I think something that we could do as we sort of start to plan out our project is to have sort of like a group of reps, or we pick the rep that's the most involved and engaged with the company, and we sort of bring them through a pilot of using the tool as we start to roll it out to them. Usually my recommendation, we talked about 3 different types of users. Usually my recommendation is that we sort of start with the internal team and then we roll out to the reps next, right? So focusing the conversation around how can we make this the most simple and easy to use for the product configurator component of it, for sort of the general workflow, and then sharing that out into the rep network. That's typically the way to alleviate some of that concern. Um,
okay.
at the moment, do your reps, are they logged into your CRM system, or do they need a place to log in?
Uh, the individuals do log into our HubSpot.
Absolutely. And what about rep firms? Do they log into the HubSpot instance as well, or are they?
No.
Yeah. So they're running their own CRM systems probably, and so we'll for that type of group, we'll need to make sure that this is a really a point and shoot exercise where they can log in, create a quote, get the information, get out, because they're using a lot of software already, right?
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So overall, our vision then is having these 3 teams of people all able to generate quotes in a self-service manner. Um, and we're going to have configurators with guardrails on them to make sure that all of the data is very clear on what you're actually able to enter in. Um, and then we're also going to, the perfect quote at the moment, or the one we're going to, what we're going to try for is to standardize on that single quote output that sort of looks the same regardless of who it's coming from. Right.
Yep.
Um, awesome. So another part of CPQ that a lot of people sort of, you know, needs to be considered when we're talking about this is automating the approvals workflows. So, you talked about a customer self-service, right? Approvals might be a really good way of handling that. Are there any existing approval rules or workflows in place right now for quoting?
Not really. We're a small shop. Um, so anytime there's pricing uh, issues, it's usually via email
Got
where
it.
we're asking each
Absolutely.
other.
Yeah. So that as a smaller company, maybe it's not quite time yet to start incorporating approvals into the process, but that's definitely a conversation we should have as we start to talk about end user quoting. Can we set it up so that first they can generate a quote, and then they can maybe even request more information via that quote form, via the configurator, different things like that, so that an individual will take a look at the quote to make sure that you're happy with it once you kind of get there.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense as like a phase 2 or 3. Like as
Yeah,
it's if we're gonna scale, you can't be asking those questions via email, for
right.
sure. But I also want to make sure we set up processes in a system that like is more empowerment focused
Mhm.
versus approval focused, if that
Absolutely,
that makes sense.
absolutely. So it's more about being able to ask a question, right? So you get to a certain point and, give the user the opportunity to say, are you sure you feel confident with this? And it's sort
Right.
of, so approvals can also be thought of that way.
Okay.
So an approval might not necessarily have to be punitive. You can think of it more along the lines of, you know, I need some help, and you can use a workflow or approvals engine to manage that as well. So that's a great call out. What about pricing today? Is there regionalized pricing? Do you have trade agreements with your sales rep? Anything like that we should be considering?
There's a few agreements in place, um, not super documented. Uh, so we're definitely growing out of like founder-led mode where, one person is having all the pricing conversations. So it's easy to kind of, have flexible conversations and ensure the margins are there and we, but also ensure we get the deal, at the same
Yeah,
time. So, not a ton like documented, I'll say.
yeah. Well, and would you say that part of the vision, at least if you looked at 12 months down the road from now and you have this CPQ in place, is part of the vision for that sort of first phase of this to go get that as well, or do we want to have sort of a more flat pricing model for everybody in the tool to start with, maybe with some management overrides or something like that?
Um, I'd say for reporting purposes and like commissions processing, now that we're talking through it, uh, having that in the system would be helpful because right now it's like end of the month, look at all the orders, depending on who it came from. I'm calculating costs and discounts and commission percentages,
Yeah.
which is an arduous process that can take a while, and it shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, let's do this with that one. When we get to the point where we're actually going to build this thing, let's write down what the commission calculation is and put it into a business rule. And we will literally calculate the commission at the deal level at the time when somebody configures it.
That would be
So
amazing.
we'll solve that, and then we'll make a report, and the report will tell you at the end of the month what each rep should be paid out in commission. So that's
It should be that easy.
it will be that easy.
Okay.
That's an
Okay.
easy go get once you have a calculator or a rules engine in place that is connected to your CRM. So
Right.
that's a that's a big one that will. Okay, so that's good to know. What about currencies? Do you quote everything in US dollars, or do you have a like a Canadian or like something like that, or is it all in dollars?
Uh, Actually, we just did one of our first ones in Canadian, so
Yeah,
USD in Canada. We haven't explored
yeah,
other avenues yet. So generally, even our international customers are paying in USD.
gotcha. Yeah, so that's so between the trade agreements that you have with your sales reps and the commissions, that'll be an interesting thing. So we can do a few different things in that situation. We can either report it all in US dollars and quote it in Canadian dollars, or we can report revenue in different ways. There's different things we can do with that. So that's another interesting thing that we should really, it probably merits its own conversation about how will we handle international quotes, things like that. um, Awesome. So that kind of gets us through a bit of our initial vision. It gets us through the conversation about what we're doing today, where we potentially would want to go with this thing in the future, right? My last question about vision related to self-service quoting. We're running into time here, but I wanted to ask it anyway. So we talked about users self-service quoting like customers. Do we want to have them logging into something in order to do that, or do we want them to be able to start a session directly on a website and going in and see what I mean?
Probably both. I mean, I definitely could see some like self-service calculators, builders like on the website,
Mhm.
and then maybe like to get the result, uh, you gotta create an account or sign in or something like that.
Yeah. So
Maybe
we
like I'm definitely a fan of not gating things. Because I think in situations like that, it'd be nice if they could print out something and then take it
yeah.
to the decision makers. So I could see both use
Yeah,
cases.
That's a complicated one because when we think about it, we've got two different things going on. We want it to be easy for an initial quote, right? To be able to go grab it. But there's some power to a user account too. Maybe we could just explain that right in there. If you have a user account, now you have your quote history too. See what I mean?
Right.
So having a user account, sometimes it's more about being able to go and check or, oh, I want to copy this quote and get another one with updated pricing for this year, things like that. Um, so that's uh, that's a whole
Yeah,
conversation.
I think like what we want to avoid is most other shops in the space. Like you have to log in to see any pricing at all, ever,
Hmm.
right? And nobody likes that.
Yep.
So having a situation where uh, we're able to explain the value of the login, but also like, hey, like here's a list price at least, right?
Hmm.
And knowing that we can kind of explain away and disclaimer like whatever we need, um, and kind of take a more transparent approach,
Yeah,
where possible.
absolutely. Yeah, well, and I'm all for that. Nothing I hate more than being gated when I'm going through and trying to get a price for something. Um, but knowing who somebody is at some point is usually necessary in order to complete the quote. So, yeah.
Yep.
Chris, do you got to go? Do we need to do configuration details at the?
Yeah, I think part two of this episode, uh, which I think is often how it happens in practice,
Yeah.
you gotta we'll call that end scene. Um,
Mhm.
and like, but those are the questions that like it's so easy to like because I even had it ready. I'm like, all right, here's what a COA looks like. How's somebody just gonna just put I need this element concentration, this, and we're just gonna be able to give them a quote.
Yep.
Uh, and it's so easy to just jump into the product specs piece,
Yep.
right? But like without this strategic, like, what do you actually want to be happening?
Yes.
Conversation,
What do you want to do? Right. It's more about
right?
like vision, right? How are we going to price this stuff out for different types of people, different situations? And we got a little into the weeds, but there's still all sorts of different things about permissioning and different prices for different groups, and do we have how do we handle a price increase for we're going to put all these prices in, what are we going to do for next year, and when you don't have a price, what happens? And there's just like all of those little details are things that if you work them out and you build a system that makes sense for all of those scenarios, um, it'll really work well. And so that's what we've been talking about is we're first product data readiness, but also do we have a vision for how we want this thing to work? So yeah.
Yeah. So next time I'll put on my product specialist or application scientist
Hmm.
hat, and we will dig into the product specs uh, to make sure we can actually understand what needs to pop out.
Absolutely.
This is awesome, Bill. I appreciate this exercise. I know for sure it will be helpful to some. Um,
Yeah.
and look forward to part two. And until then, think about those outcomes. Like how many people are actually quoting pricing
Hmm.
and when are they doing it and how much work is everybody doing to make that happen?
Yeah.
Think about those processes, find those opportunities, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
How was
I'm riding a
that?
bike, man.